Good evening. Hope everything is going great. Hope y'all are doing good. It's Pastor Trey Lyerly. I don't have Lauren in here doing the Pastor Trey impression that she loves to do. But anyhow, it's just me. Hope y'all are having a great day. Man, it's the last day of 2020. I know we're all excited about that. That's something to be excited about. And then we're going to pray that 2021 is going to be a little less eventful than 2020. And we're going to, I don't know. I don't even know what I want anymore. I just don't want, I just want this pandemic to be over with. That's my New Year's resolution is to not have COVID be a pandemic anymore. I don't know if that's even a personal. I think that's just everybody's. I think that's just kind of everybody's consensus. No, that's collectively as a society, our New Year's resolution is to get rid of COVID and everything. But anyhow, man, hope y'all are having a great week. Let's start off in prayer, and we're going to jump right into the lesson. Lord, we come before you, and God, just want to thank you so much for this time. Thank you so much for your word. And God, as we are delving into the study about different themes that are that are central to your word, God, I pray that as we do this, we'll learn quite a bit, and God, get a better understanding of your word as a whole, get a better understanding of how your entire word works together as one cohesive unit, as one cohesive book. Lord, again, just thank you so much for everything that you're doing to and through us. Thank you so much for your many, many blessings that you pour out on us. God, you're a good God and a great God. We love you. We give you all the honor, glory, and praise. In Christ's name, amen. Whew, I'm going to try to get me something to drink. And like before I started talking, my voice was okay. My voice sounded great. And all of a sudden I start recording and my voice sounds awful. But anyhow, let's jump right into it. So we are continuing our series, our Wednesday night series about themes that run through the Bible. And we have covered a couple things. We've kind of covered the history of what goes on throughout the Bible. And if you haven't seen that one, take a minute. It's kind of long. It's long. And a couple of these are really long, but we're going all the way through the Bible. We're following a central theme all the way through the Bible, so a couple of them are going to be long. This one shouldn't be as long. In fact, this one should be relatively short. But if you haven't watched the one about the history throughout the Bible, watch that one because that's really important to understand what goes on when as relates to these themes, as relates to what goes on, or what's going on in these themes. So if you haven't watched the one about the history, stop, watch that one, and then come back and start watching the rest of these. But tonight, the theme that we're going to be going through is going to be consequences of actions. And this is a theme that runs all the way through the Bible, that actions have consequences. And what are the actions of those consequences? And how does our actions correlate with consequences, because in different periods in the Bible that correlation has changed, and that's something that's really important that we have to understand, is that the correlation of action versus consequence has changed throughout different periods of the Bible for different people, and that's very, very important to understand, and what I mean by that you'll see as we kind of go on and we kind of get a little deeper into this of consequence of action. So let's continue on. So in the garden, again, God makes everything perfect. Everything is perfect. Everything is great. God looks at His creation and says it is very good. And God in that gives one rule, one thing that you just can't do, and if you do it, there will be a consequence. So in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, we are given or Adam is giving a consequence to an action. That if you do this, there will be a consequence. In Genesis 2:17, it says, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you shall eat it, you shall surely die." And what this means, so the surely die, the way we read that is, and the day that you eat it, you're going to die that day. And that's the way it kind of sounds like, but that's not what the Hebrew says. What the Hebrew says and how it's literally translated is surely die is the literal translation is die. That he says the word die twice. He says, "In the day that you shall eat it, you shall die." And what that means is you will die dying. You and so I'm going to say that again. You will die dying. In other words, you will begin the process of dying. You will no longer be immortal, but your body will die. You will begin. You will begin to physically die. And that's exactly what happens. And this also alludes to a spiritual death. But again, so in the very front, before sin, before anything, God lets us know, hey, there's going to be consequences to action. And the main consequence to action, the main consequence to sin is death. All right? So sin equals death. If you do this, you eat of this tree, you will die. And that is ultimately the consequence of our actions. Ultimately, the consequence of our sin is death. And that is kind of the biggest one. But for the purpose of this week and the purpose of this study, we're not going to be talking so much about the end result of our sin as much as we're going to be talking about the immediate results and consequences that happen, like you sin and a bad thing happens, or you do good and a good thing happens. That's more of what we're going to be talking about in this theme, is immediate kind of on earth in this lifetime consequences to action, not so much the end consequence that sin equals death. We're going to jump into that theme in much more detail. That's going to be when we jump into that one, that's probably going to be like another hour and a half long video, whereas this one's not going to be nearly that long. And again, we kind of touched on this, the spiritual death and also the beginning of physical death. And again, this is reiterated in Romans 6:23, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life." Again, and like I said, this isn't going to be the main thing that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be more so focusing on the immediate consequences of, if doing bad and having bad things happen, doing good and having good things happen. And so that's more what we're going to be talking about in this study. So the curse. After man and woman eats of the fruit and they hide from God, God ends up cursing them. And in Genesis 3:16, to the woman he said, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception, and in pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." So that is the woman sins, and there's an immediate curse that follows that sin. And again, for Genesis 3:17, this is to Adam. And he says, then to Adam he said, "Because you have indeed, or you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree which I have commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all." So, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you, and you shall eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you shall return. So here God is announcing a curse on Adam, saying, listen, it's not going to be easy anymore. You're going to have to work the ground, and it's going to produce thorns and thistles. And the big thing that he says here is for out of the ground you were taken, and at the ground you're going to return. In other words, you're going to die. Just as I said that whenever you eat of the fruit, you're going to die. You're going to die. This is the consequence of that action. So we see here, Adam and Eve sin. They do something wrong. When they do something wrong, there's an immediate curse that follows that. There's a direct correlation there. So, and then also another correlation, another result of this is that man being banned from the garden, thus banned from the tree of life and from the presence of God. So then we go into the pre-flood time period and how the correlation between doing wrong and being cursed and doing right and being blessed. Let's take a look at how this works. So in Genesis chapter 4, we have the event of Cain and Abel. Cain becomes jealous of Abel's sacrifice and kills Abel. Well, when Cain kills Abel, God curses Cain. God puts a curse on Cain of that he has to wander and he has to roam around and that he can't settle in one place and that the ground's going to, again, it intensifies the original curse. And Cain says, this is more than I can bear, and God gives him a mark that, in essence, the way it reads, it seems like it's a mark that protects him from other people. And so again, here in Cain and Abel, in this event, we see another direct correlation between doing wrong and being cursed by God. And so an immediate consequence of sin. And so far, there's a direct correlation between doing something wrong and a curse from God. So far in the Word of God, we have Adam and Eve doing wrong, and they do wrong. They're both cursed. The serpent does wrong, and he is cursed. Cain does wrong, and he is cursed. So far, we see this direct correlation between doing wrong and being cursed. However, as we're going to see in just a second, that's not the hard, fast rule. So in Genesis 4:23, we go on down and we learn, we start hearing about Cain's lineage. And this is one of Cain's great-great-grandsons. And he says, then Lemech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, wives of Lemech, listen to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lemech 70-fold. And so, this is kind of a weird passage, but basically this guy named Lemech is bragging about killing somebody and not receiving the same curse that Cain did. In other words, he is pretty much saying, hey, I've gotten away with this. Cain was cursed. I've gotten away with it. And then he starts making light of the curse that Cain received and saying, oh, I've done so wrong that if Cain was avenged sevenfold, I'll be avenged 77-fold. And so again, we see this where this correlation stops, where Adam and Eve does wrong, they're immediately punished. Cain does wrong, he's immediately punished. He was immediately cursed. Well, now you have this guy named Lemech who does wrong and no curse. No, there's nothing that happens to him. In fact, he's so brazen about it that he actually makes fun of the curse that was on Cain. And so we come out here seeing, is there really an immediate correlation between doing what's wrong and a curse or a blessing? And according to Lemech, not necessarily. And sometimes there will be, and sometimes there won't be. However, Lemech's sin, along with the rest of the world's sin, does result in judgment. Whereas God doesn't step in and place a curse on Lemech for being evil, nor does he do this to all the rest of the people in the world at the time that were completely evil. He doesn't step in and curse them at that time. He does judge them. Eventually, the judgment falls on Lemech. It comes on everybody else who was in the world at this time, and a blanket judgment for everybody's evilness. Although an individual curse didn't happen for their evil, God does judge the entire world through the flood. And again, and this brings up something that God says about himself in Numbers 14:18. It says, "The Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the father onto the children in the third and the fourth generation." And that verse is saying, it says, listen, God is just, or God is forgiving, God is full of mercy and is full of grace, but he's not going to just clear the guilty. He's not going to just make things, go away. There has to be, and we're going to get into this in another thing, there has to be an atonement. There has to be, there are payments. There is a price for sin that has to be paid. And I'm not just, God's not going to, just sweep that under the rug. He is a just God. And again, although Lemech is not immediately cursed, is not immediately punished in the way that Cain was, judgment did come. And judgment for his sins and judgment for the things that he was doing did eventually befall him. And so the book of Job is further along in the Bible, but the time frame that Job happens is pretty close after the flood. It's after the flood and before Abraham. But this is exactly what the book of Job is about. The book of Job is about this discussion, or in the case of the book of Job, this debate about the correlation between doing good and being blessed and doing evil and being cursed. This is what the book of Job in its entirety is about. It's about this correlation. It's about our theme today of the correlation between doing what is right and being blessed because of it, and doing what is wrong and being cursed about it. And is there actually a correlation? And when we get to the end of the book of Job, we have this long debate between Job and his friends about this. And Job saying, listen, there is no correlation between doing good and being blessed here on earth, nor is there a correlation between doing evil and being cursed. That it's all up to God, and it's the will of God, and it's the sovereignty of God, whether somebody is blessed or cursed. And his friends saying, no, there's a direct correlation. And at the end of the book, God reveals that, like, no, this happened to you because for my glory, because you have brought glory to me because of your suffering, and I will restore it to you. But no, there is no, in Job's time, there is no correlation between doing what is right and being blessed and doing what is wrong and being cursed. It is all the will and the sovereignty of God, who he chooses. He blesses who he chooses to bless, and he curses who he chooses to curse. And it is all to fit his purpose, and it's all to fit his will. And that is what the book of Job is about. And that is very, very of key importance, and one of the books of wisdom that is kind of difficult to understand, but this is the theological point that the book of Job is making. And this, again, the time frame of this is very important, because the time frame of Job is set pre-patriarchs, which we're going to get into right here. Because during the patriarchs, this changes just a little bit. In Genesis chapter 17, God makes a covenant with Abraham that changes this a little bit, and it changes it more from God's going to bless who he chooses to bless, and God's going to curse who he chooses to curse, to this particular family, Abraham, your family. I'm going to give you a covenant. We're going to make a deal, and if you keep this covenant, you're going to be blessed. If you don't keep this covenant, you're not going to be blessed. And so now, inside this covenant that God is making with the patriarchs, now there does become a correlation between doing what is right and being blessed, and doing what is evil and being cursed. But this is specifically defined in this covenant. I got a thing. Go away. Thing at the bottom. Thank you. God makes a covenant with Abraham, and this begins a correlation between keeping the covenant and being blessed. The actual covenant time. I mean, so God really expands on this. So with the covenant, God establishes that there will absolutely be a covenant between keeping the covenant and being blessed. So after the patriarchs, after the book of Genesis, once we get into the book of Exodus, and this family that was Abraham's family now has become this great people group in Egypt, and God has delivered them out of Egypt. He takes them to the Mount of Sinai, and there, the same covenant that he makes with Abraham, their forefather, he renews with them and expands on this covenant in great, great detail of saying, hey, and again, this covenant is very, very important, and it's so important to understand this covenant and this correlation between keeping the covenant and being blessed, and breaking the covenant and being cursed. Because prior to this, there was no correlation. There was no official correlation between doing what was right and being blessed, and doing what was evil and being cursed. It's just sometimes it would happen that way, and sometimes it wouldn't. But here, God is making a covenant. God is making a deal. You keep this covenant, you will be blessed. I will bless you as a nation. You break this covenant, I will chastise you. I will curse you. You will fall into the hands of your enemies. And this is the covenant that God is making with the nation of Israel. And it is this covenant, it is explicit to the people of Israel. It's not reaching out to everybody else. It is explicit to that time period and that people group, that this covenant that falls inside this covenant. And that is so important to understand the Old Testament, to understand from Exodus on to the rest of the Old Testament, that they are living under this covenant. And in this covenant, there is a direct correlation between doing what is right, at least as a people group, doing what is right and being blessed, and doing what is evil and being cursed. Direct correlation that doesn't always necessarily have happened in the past or happens now. So, continuing on. This concept, again, is central to understanding the rest of the Old Testament. And kind of one of the first places that we see them fail this covenant is the covenant is breached when the Israelites fail to go into the Promised Land. So they get to the border of the Promised Land, they refuse to go in it, and they breach the covenant already. And God says, I'm gonna wipe them out. You don't want to keep the covenant. You don't want to go and take the land that I've promised you. I'm not gonna bless you. The deal is this: you keep the covenant and you do what I'm asking you to do, you'll be blessed. And if not, you're not going to be blessed. And God tells Moses, I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses intercedes and says, hey, God, don't wipe them out. And God decides not to, but God says, I'm not going to let them go. We've got a covenant. We've got a deal. And so this generation is not going into the Promised Land. And again, direct correlation between obedience and blessing and disobedience and curses. So in Joshua, we see this again. We see this um, very, very distinctly in Joshua chapter 7 and Joshua chapter 8. And we see this in the sin of Achan, which results in a defeat at Ai. And what happens in this is during the Battle of Jericho, and they're marching around Jericho, and they're doing all that, and the walls of Jericho fall, they rush in, and they take the city. Now, what they have been told, what the entire army has been told is, hey, you're not going to take any plunder from this battle. Well, this one soldier named Achan, he takes some stuff. He takes some Babylonian garments. He takes some loot and brings it back and hides it. And so the next battle that they go to, the city of Ai, which should have been it should have been a layup. They come in there and they get it handed to them. The children of Israel lose and they lose people, they lose men, and Joshua's, what's going on here? And there's a direct correlation that the sin of this man, the sin of one soldier that broke the covenant, that didn't do what he was supposed to do, resulted in God's blessings being removed from them. And so again, we see this in the conquest, this direct correlation. Do what's right, you'll be blessed. Do what's wrong, I'm going to remove that blessing from you. And so Joshua goes in and he purifies the camp. He puts Achan to death, and they go back and God's blessing is back with them. They defeat Ai, and they continue on and they steamroll the rest of the promised land. But again, here inside the context of this covenant, we see a direct correlation between you do what's right, you'll be blessed. You do what's wrong, you're going to be cursed. Direct correlation inside of the context of the covenant. Continuing on. The Judges. Oh my goodness, y'all. The book of Judges is the embodiment of what we call the Deuteronomic Cycle. And the Deuteronomic Cycle is exactly what we've been talking about. It is inside the covenant, direct correlation between doing what is right and being blessed, doing what is wrong and being cursed. And there is what's called the Deuteronomic Cycle that we see in Judges, where the children of Israel will do what's right for a period, and they will be blessed. Then they will start worshiping false gods. They'll start worshiping the gods of the people that were around them, and they begin being cursed, and they fall into the hands of their enemies, and bad things happen. And this is the book of Judges. Do what's right, be blessed. Do what's wrong, be cursed. And it's so pronounced. It's so there's so much of it in the book of Judges that it's actually given a name called the Deuteronomic Cycle, of this cycle of blessings and cursings that have direct correlation with the actions of the people. When the people are doing what's right, they're blessed. When the people are doing what's wrong, they are cursed. And this is not the norm for everybody, but inside the covenant, this is the norm. It's the norm because God made a covenant. God made a deal that said, hey, listen, if you do what's right, I'll bless you. If you do what's wrong, you'll be cursed. And so inside of that, there is, like I said, this, like I begin hammering, and I'm hammering this for a reason, there is that direct correlation. So during the kingdom reign, we have so during the kingdom time, you have Saul, and Saul does what's evil in the sight of the Lord. He doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He's kicked out. He's done. God gets rid of him and puts David in as the king. And then this is a new covenant that God makes with David. He renews the covenant. This is kind of a renewing of the covenant with Israel, but then a specific covenant with David. And 2 Samuel 7:14 through 15. And it says, I'll be his father, talking about David's son. I'll be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I'll chasten him. So again, direct correlation between doing evil and being chastened. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and the blows of the Son of Men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed before you. So what God is saying here is, listen, the direct correlation between doing what is right and being blessed and doing what is evil and being cursed or being chastened, that is still a thing for your son. All right, and if your son does what's right, I'm going to bless him. If your son does what is evil, I'm going to chasten him. However, I'm not going to remove him the way I removed Saul. All right, your lineage will be on the throne forever. However, I may have to chasten them, and there will still be a direct correlation between doing what is right and being blessed and doing what is wrong and being chastened. And we see this because the kingdom is split because of Solomon's sin. Solomon goes and he has all these wives, and one thing that leads to is he starts practicing idolatry, the same idolatry that his wives practiced. And again, Solomon does what's wrong. Because he does what is evil, the kingdom is split. And the only reason it's not completely ripped from him is because of this covenant that God makes with David. But Solomon, again, direct correlation. Solomon does what's wrong, results in a curse. Let me use my keyboard, not my mouse, so that little thing stops popping up. All right. Here we go. Time to get unpopular. All right, 2 Chronicles 7:14. Everybody knows this verse. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. When we talk about verses that are taken out of context and used inappropriately, this one is absolutely at the top of the list. Top 5 verses that are taken out of context and used absolutely inappropriately. Because we love to claim this verse that is specific for Israel. That this, okay, so the what's going on when God says this? God tells Solomon this whenever Solomon is consecrating the temple. Solomon has just built the temple. God is consecrating the temple, and God tells Solomon this. God is renewing what he has said all along in the covenant, that for Israel, and inside the constraints of this covenant, there is a direct correlation between doing good and being blessed and doing evil and being cursed. Okay, God is restating that here. This is a restatement of God's promise to bless Israel when Israel does right and curse Israel when Israel does wrong. Okay? And this is specific to Israel. This is specific to Judah. Okay? This lives this. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I'll hear from heaven, I'll forgive their sin, and I'll heal their land. This is specific to the Israelites who are living in this covenant where there is a direct correlation between doing what is good and being blessed and doing what is evil and being cursed. Okay? As we're going to continue, we're going to see we do not live under that covenant. And so, whereas this verse is an awesome verse and it's an awesome promise that we have from God for Israel prior to the arrival of the Messiah, this verse is not about America. Okay? God has never promised America that, you know, I mean, it's. I want to throw this out here. It's very possible that regardless if we fall on our faces and we do what's right, it's very possible that there may not be any healing coming. And why do we need to know this? We need to know this because we are. It would be like this. It would be like. It would be like, let's say I have a 16-year-old child and a 13-year-old child, and the 16-year-old child has their driver's license, okay? And I tell the 16-year-old child, say, listen, you clean your room and you'll be able to borrow the car and go, out driving. Okay, so I have there's a different stipulations there with the 16-year-old because he has a driver's license. So I'll tell the 16-year-old, listen, clean your room, you can take the car out. All right. The 13-year-old hears this and cleans his room and then comes to me and says, hey, Dad, I cleaned my room, so let me take the car out. That deal wasn't made with you, okay? That deal was made with the 16-year-old. You're the 13-year-old. I haven't made that kind of deal with you. I've made different deals with you, okay? We're under a new covenant. And so when we're reading these things, and again, this is why guys like, there's some people, it don't bother them, and then some people like me, you really get hung up on passages like this. And so just keep in mind, this particular passage was meant for the Israelites, and it was spoken by God inside the parameters of the Old Covenant. And inside the parameters of the Old Covenant, there was a direct correlation between doing what was right and being blessed, and doing what was evil and being cursed. And this particular verse is a restatement of that. Don't hate me. It's everybody's favorite verse that doesn't apply to us. During the time of the split kingdoms, the Deuteronomic cycle continues as it does, or as it did in the book of Judges. And during the split kingdom time, again, what we see in the book of Judges continues on where Israel, not really Israel, Israel just, that they really don't go in a cycle. They just get further and further away from God. But Judah, the southern kingdom, does go through the Deuteronomic cycle, as they will do good for a while, then they will do bad for a while. They'll do good and be blessed, and do wrong and be cursed. And again, the Deuteronomic cycle continues playing out during the split kingdoms time, and the books of Chronicles, Second Chronicles, Kings, Second Kings, what have you. And during this time, prophets are sent to Israel and Judah to try to keep them faithful to the covenant. And so God is trying to remind them of the covenant, and trying to remind them, listen, if you just do right, I'll bless you. If you do what's wrong, I'm going to curse you. And God sends the prophets to remind Israel of this. And as we read the prophets, as we read the Old Testament prophets, this is the main theme of what they're saying. This is the main theme, and there are some prophecies there for future, but the main thing that these prophets are saying, the majority of prophecy that we're going to read in the Old Testament prophets, are going to be them reminding the nations of Israel and the nations of Judah to stick to the covenant, and reminding them, listen, you do what's right, God's going to bless us. You do what's wrong, God's going to curse us. And that is the central theme to the message of the Old Testament prophets. And again, direct correlation. Israel stays, or Israel strays so far, so northern Israel strays so far from the covenant that they are conquered by the Assyrians. So as I alluded to a second ago, the northern kingdom of Israel, Israel and Judah, Israel just they stray so far from where they're supposed to be. Eventually, they're conquered by the Assyrians, and then a couple hundred years later, Judah is conquered by the Babylonians. Here we go. Eventually, Judah, during exile, Judah strays so far from the covenant that they are conquered by Babylon. And although they are in exile, the covenant is still active. But this is kind of the ultimate, hey, I've told you and told you and told you and told you that if you don't do what's right, I'm going to remove the blessing from you. I'm going to curse you. I'm going to allow your neighbors to conquer you. This is kind of the ultimate embodiment of this. This is the big spanking that you're getting. Direct correlation. You're doing what's evil and you're being cursed. And so the covenant and the correlation is still very much so active during the exile period. I'm killing everybody's favorite verses today. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. And again, another passage of scripture that doesn't, it's not to us, okay? It's not to you. It is in every get well card that we send out. We have Jeremiah 29:11. And it wasn't written to us, okay? Jeremiah 29 is a letter that Jeremiah writes to the captives who are in Babylon, and it is a letter of encouragement to them, reminding them, hey, God's not done with you. God has not abandoned the covenant. This is just part of the covenant. This is because we've failed Him, and God fully intends on restoring Israel and restoring you, and there's still a hope and a future for Israel. Sorry, this verse isn't to us. Okay, and again, this verse is written inside of this old covenant where there's a direct correlation between doing good and being blessed and doing evil and being cursed. And what Jeremiah is saying here is, listen, God, the plans that God has for us is that we'll do what's right and He will restore us. That's the plan. That's to give us a hope and a future. Because we cannot claim this verse as the church age, and I'll explain. We'll get to that, why we can't really claim this verse on us, and we have to understand why and when it was written. I'm killing everybody's favorite verses tonight. I'm sorry. So the intertestamental period. All right, so this is the period that is in between. This is the couple hundred years in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what goes on the couple hundred years in between the Old Testament and New Testament is there is a fervor for keeping the covenant. And they are still inside that covenant, and they're still inside the covenant of, hey, you do what's right, you'll be blessed. You do what's evil, you'll be cursed. And there is a fervor for keeping the covenant. And the correlation in their mind is, we keep the covenant, and if we keep the covenant good enough, the Messiah will come and the Messiah will deliver us. And so that is the correlation, that in the minds of the Israelites, we're going to really do a good job of keeping the covenant so that the Messiah will come and the Messiah will deliver us from the Romans and deliver us from the Greeks, or deliver us from the Persians, whoever's over us at this time. God will come and deliver us from them. This causes extremism about keeping the law. Okay, so they have seen their history. And they have seen the history of Israel, of being inside this covenant and having this direct correlation between doing what is right and being blessed, doing what is evil and being cursed. They have received from the prophets that there's there's this Messiah that's going to come, that's going to deliver them. And so from their history, from what they know about the covenant, from what the prophets have told them, from what was handed down to them from Moses and David and Solomon and all this, they get this idea that, okay, the reason the Messiah hasn't come is because we haven't been keeping the law good enough yet. And so we've got to and they develop these extreme measures of keeping the law. And when Jesus is born, in Jesus' lifetime, we see that. We see this extremism about the law, about keeping the law. And part of that was brought about because of this correlation, and because they, in their minds, there was a correlation between the better we keep the law, the more likely the Messiah is going to come and deliver us. In fact, if you watch The Chosen, awesome miniseries, and during the first couple of episodes, Nicodemus is in teaching of the Pharisees in Galilee, and one of the things he says, hey, the reason the Messiah hasn't come is because we have these fishermen fishing on the Sabbath, and the Messiah is never going to come if this keeps going on. And that was the mindset of the Jewish people then, that people breaking the law and not keeping the law to the perfect extreme that they were keeping the law is hindering the Messiah from coming. And that creates this extremism about keeping the law. Now everything changes. All right. John chapter 9, 1 through 4. During the Messiah's reign, while not really the Messiah's reign, but while the Messiah is on earth, while Jesus is on earth, John chapter 9, 1 through 4, and this is a pretty potent verse, a pretty, something that we kind of glance over, but it really, Jesus really challenges what the Jewish people believed, or the way it was for the Jewish people. And so John chapter 9, 1 through 4 says, "Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' And Jesus answered." So first of all, these Jewish disciples of Jesus ask a question that for us is kind of dumb, but for them makes sense. He says, "Listen, hey, Jesus, this guy's been blind from birth. So is this because of his sin? Or is this because of his parents' sin or his grandparents' sin?" And for us, that's kind of like, no. But for them, they have been living several hundred years now under this covenant that teaches you do what's right, you get blessed. You do what's wrong, you get cursed. And so this is a legitimate question for them. This is a legitimate thought process because they have lived under a culture that has lived under this correlation for several hundred years now. And so they asked this question about this blind man. And Jesus answered to them that, neither this man nor his parents sinned. And he says, "But the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can do work." And Jesus says, listen, nobody sinned and caused this. And he's saying the reason, in essence, what he says, the reason that this man has been blind is so that God will get glory and I will get glory. And so now, this isn't a new concept, but it's a new concept for Israel. It's a new concept for the Jewish people. The Jewish people have lived under what initially began as collectively, as a nation, do what's right and be blessed, do what's wrong and be cursed. And over the years, especially during the intertestamental period, it has morphed into individually do what's right, be blessed, do what's wrong, be cursed. Now Jesus is saying, no, that's not the case. That's not the case. This guy, the reason that he is blind has nothing to do with his sin. Jesus is saying there is no correlation between this man's sin, his parents' sin, and the condition that he is in. And we are and this is, Jesus is now telling us, not in this moment, but he is alluding to and letting us know we're going into a new covenant, okay? That the old covenant is void and we're entering into a new covenant. And in this new covenant that Jesus makes with us, that correlation between being blessed or doing good and being blessed and doing wrong and being cursed, that correlation is not necessarily there anymore. That correlation was inside the context of the old covenant. Inside the context of the new covenant is this: if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the grave, you will be saved. That's in the context of the new covenant. The new covenant is not necessarily dealing with blessings and cursings in this life. It is dealing with salvation in the next life. And what happens in this life now goes back to what we see with this blind man. it goes back to what we read in Job. Okay, so Jesus now in this is alluding to what he's going to do in the new covenant of taking back, of removing this direct correlation between this old covenant correlation between doing good and being blessed and doing what is wrong and being cursed. And we're going back to the way it was in the book of Job, where anybody can be blessed because God deems it that they should be blessed. Anybody can go through persecution or hard time because that brings glory to God. And that is where we're at. We are in this new covenant. Matthew 5:11-12. He says, "Blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you and falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for your reward is in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets that were before you." And so Jesus here is saying, listen, just because you do what is right and just because you live according to my name doesn't mean you're going to be blessed. In fact, there are going to be people who persecute you. There are going to be people that defile you, that persecute you, that hate you, and you have to keep in mind that our reward is not on earth. That is the key thing of the new covenant. The old covenant, their reward was on earth. Their reward was, we're going to be blessed here on earth. Now, there's more to it. There's more to the old covenant. Whenever it talks about the atonement for sins and sacrifices, and that's a whole nother. That's a lesson for another week. But as far as on earth, and as far as in this life, as far as doing good and being cursed, that's no longer the case in the new covenant. We are back to the way that things were in Job, where God chooses who he's going to bless and he chooses who he's going to curse. And it's all for his glory. And so, and this is why we cannot apply verses like Jeremiah 29:11 to us. We can't claim that for us because it wasn't written to us. It was written to people who were under a different covenant than what we're under. And so we've got to be careful about that. The early church. The early church faced great persecution, although they were faithful. So again, although they were faithful, although they did exactly what they were supposed to do, although they were, they lived according to what they were supposed to do, they were persecuted. They faced hard times. There was no correlation between them doing right and being blessed. Okay, they did what was right and they were cursed. They did what was right and they were persecuted. All right, there was no correlation there. The only correlation was they were faithful and God received glory. And that was during the early church. Now, during the church age, again, we live under the new covenant where the correlation of sin and consequences, much like the book of Job. Much like the whole argument in the book of Job, that is more of what we're living under, where God can choose. You can live a perfectly good life, and God can choose to allow something bad to happen to you for his glory, and it's for his glory. Or we have evil people in the world that receive blessings here in this world. That's the church age. That's what we're living in. And being that we're living in the church age, we can't take verses that were in the old covenant and about blessings, about the you're going to be blessed if you do this. We cannot apply those to us because we're living under a different covenant. To the end times. All right, so just like before the flood, there wasn't necessarily a correlation on the earth between, immediate punishment and for sins and immediate blessings for doing good. But at the end of the pre-flood era, there was a judgment for sin. There will be a judgment for all sin. In the end times, all these people on earth who it seems like they're getting away with it. There seems like that, they're getting away with the sin, and those who are doing what is right is getting cursed, and those who are doing what is evil are getting blessed. In the end times, there will be a judgment for that. There will be there will be a reckoning. for that, just as there was during the flood. Revelation 20:12. I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. And it goes on to say that only those whose name was written in the book of life was able to enter into heaven. And so there will be a judgment according to what people have done. There will be a judgment that you will stand accountable, and the books will be opened of everything that you've done, and you will be judged according to that, and people will be judged according to that. And what we said, the payment of sin will be expected during that time. But also, and this is something we know that as Christians, we know that as Christians we expect that, but also in Revelation 22:12, it says, and behold, and this is Jesus speaking, behold, I am coming quickly, my reward with me, to give everyone according to his work. Now, as Christians, we tend to not realize this. We tend to realize it but not put it in action. We realize it, but we don't cause this to affect our lifestyle, because we go, okay, there's no correlation on earth about, I can do evil and be blessed, and I can do good and be cursed, and it's all up to God. There's no correlation. However, there will be a correlation at the end times as Christians. And so a lot of times the Christian mindset is, oh, I'm saved, therefore the reward is all mine. And you're saved and you're going to get into heaven, but there are going to be different rewards for different Christians. And here, Jesus said, behold, I'm coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give everyone according to his work. Okay? My reward is with me to give everyone according to their work. And so there will be different rewards. And the Bible describes some of these rewards, but not all of them. But there will definitely be rewards according to what you have done. There will be a direct correlation between what you have done here on earth with the gospel, with what you have been given, with the blessings, with the talents, with the money, with everything that God has blessed you with. There will be rewards that go along with how you've done it and what you've done and the work that you've put into it. For those of you who are working in the church, for those of you who are stepping up and doing the things that need to be done so that we can do ministry, there is a reward coming for that. You might not get it here on earth. And Jesus says, quite frankly, if you're looking for it on earth, you've got it on earth. But there's a reward coming for that. You will be rewarded for that. For the work that you put in here on earth, you're going to be rewarded for that. That should be motivation to get out here and and that's an eternal reward. That's a reward that you will have forever. And that's an awesome thing to think about. And so there is a direct correlation between what we're doing in this earth or what we're doing in this life, and maybe not the blessings that we receive in this life, but the blessings that we're going to receive in the next life. And there is that direct correlation. And I personally think that is better than a reward that we're going to receive here, because a reward that we're going to receive here is going to be gone, one day, and the rewards that we receive in heaven are going to be eternal, and that's going to be an awesome thing. So I encourage you, first thing I want to encourage you to this lesson, I want you to understand that just because you're doing good doesn't necessarily mean God is obligated to bless you. Just because someone does wrong doesn't mean that God is obligated to curse them. On the flip side of that, just because you're going through a hard time doesn't mean that you've done something to deserve it. Okay? You could just be going through a hard time. And likewise, just because you're going through a good time doesn't mean you've done anything to deserve it. It's just God may be blessing you. Okay, so that is the new covenant that we live in, and that is something that is important for us to understand and to believe. Now, the second thing that I want you to understand is that as you are working in the church, man, I'm going through hard times. I'm going through difficult times. I'm going, all those hard times, difficult times, that is going to be rewards in heaven. I truly believe this. I truly believe that those people who have a really strong sin nature that they have to overcome, whenever it says that we have to deny ourselves, when they struggle with a really strong sin nature and they overcome that's going to be a huge reward for them in heaven. And there are some sins that are much, much more difficult to overcome than others. And I believe when a person overcomes one of those really, really tough sin natures, that's a big reward in heaven. I personally believe that. When a person denies themselves in that way, when a person gives of themselves to the furtherment of the gospel, that's going to be a huge reward in heaven, and that's what we're working towards. And I want you to remember that. I want you to remember that we're not working, we're not striving for things here on earth. We're striving for things in heaven. We're striving for rewards in heaven that we might not ever see on this earth, but we'll have them forever in our glorious home. Yeah, hope y'all learned something from this. Hope this kind of put some pieces of that puzzle together. Hopefully, it kind of made us kind of better understand why we can't take some passages that are in the Old Testament and apply them directly to us here in the New Testament or in the church age, because we live under a different covenant than they did. I hope y'all, if you're going through some hard times and been struggling with why, I hope this gives you some encouragement of kind of why, and to keep kind of muscling on. Anyhow, love y'all. Hope y'all have a great week. If you need anything, reach out to me, and we will see y'all Sunday.